Hi guys, today I'll be taking a look at Akko's very first clicky switch, the Akko Creamy Cyan. Let's get started. But firstly, a disclaimer, these switches were sent to me by Akko. I wasn't paid to make this review and I will remain as impartial as I can as per usual. Anyway, enjoy the review. Now, the Akko Creamy Cyan looks very similar to the Durock T1 Silent Shrimp. However, they are two completely different switches. The Creamy Cyan also uses a click jacket for its click mechanism, the same one you'll find on Cherry MX Blues and many of its clones. Now, pricing wise, these are $11.99 for 45 switches on Akko's website, placing these in the budget range. And this is what they look like when disassembled. Feel free to pause the video. Now, let's move on to the switch characteristics. On-center key presses are very smooth with only slight scratchiness on very slow key presses. Off-center key presses are noticeably scratchier on slower key presses, but it's very subtle when typing normally. Overall they're smooth but far from being in the top tier, 7 out of 10. Now, according to Akko, these switches have a peak tactile force of 65 grams at 1.3mm, an actuation force of 50 grams at 2mm, and a bottom out distance of 4mm. Now, in terms of the actual key feel, they feel the closest to the Cherry MX Green, but noticeably lighter than the Kale Box Pale Blue, although I'd say these are on the heavy side of things. Also, these switches are much more consistent compared to the Cherry MX Green by far. The tactility is more rounded and is overall a nicer switch to use on a daily basis. However, I still prefer the overall weighting of the Kale Box Pink or Jade due to their crisper tactility, which many click jacket switches such as this just can't seem to match. Overall, since I'm a fan of heavily weighted switches, I quite like these. Plus, unlike most click jacket switches, these are consistent and much more pleasant to use. 8 out of 10. Now, I've mentioned a number of times that these are click jacket switches, and that also means that yes, these have the same loose and rattly sound that all of them have, unfortunately. Overall, sound is its weakest point. I'm not a huge fan of loud and high-pitched clicky switches. 4 out of 10. Now, take a listen and enjoy. Now, having just reviewed a very light linear switch, the Akko Dracula, it did take me a few hours for me to get used to them, but I eventually got comfortable. To start off, their key feel isn't up to scratch when compared to the rest of their lineup. The feel is less refined and sloppy, at least by Akko's standard. To add to that, some of the switches would ever so slightly bind when typing at slower speeds. It was uncommon, but again, this is atypical from Akko. However, when compared to the Cherry MX Green, its closest competitor, it's a night and day difference. Plus, even though this is one of Akko's worst performing switches, they're still miles ahead consistency wise compared to most click jacket switches. That's actually quite impressive. Overall, this is for those looking to upgrade from a Cherry MX Green, or for those looking for a cheap, heavy clicky switch. But for whatever reason, you don't want to buy Kale Box switches. 6 out of 10. Now, I don't often choose a clicky switch for gaming, especially not a click jacket one like this, and today is no different. However, they performed reasonably well in both fast and slow paced games due to their consistency. Although just be warned that since these are on the heavier side, they aren't the most practical for most gamers. On another note, I briefly mentioned them binding earlier on, and they do make a return here for slower key presses. Again, it was uncommon, but there's clearly a lack of refinement with these. Overall, these are a super weird choice for gaming, but the weighting does suit my preference and they are serviceable, but a bit unrefined. 6 out of 10. In conclusion, a new click jacket switch in 2024 into 2025 is very odd, and especially more so by Akko. But this is one of the better ones out there, even if it isn't a match to many of Kale's own box switches. The final score for this switch is 31 out of 50 or 62%, which is good for a clicky switch. And that's the end of the review. Next time I'll hopefully be looking at more Akko switches. Anyway, until then, take care and goodbye.